Hello everyone, Prince Dabslot here, the best Delta Green YouTuber with the worst username, and today I'm going to be talking about home scenes, their importance, how to implement them, because I found that for something that is talked so much about in the Delta Green tabletop role-playing game, as far as this large significant part of this system, the actual advice on how to run it is quite thin and mechanically as well. So without too much further ado, we'll be going into home scenes, how I do it, and problems and issues I've ran into and how to beat those. And hey, a like a day keeps the Illigor away. If my videos help you out, like and subscribe. Thanks everyone. So, if you're new to Delta Green or just don't know about what home scenes really are, it's over the course of a regular game of Delta Green. When your agents are on a mission or accomplishing something, they will have impacts to their life. Either be they could get injured and take serious long term damage. They will degrade their bonds, which are their relationships to other people in their lives, usually outside of Delta Green, to keep themselves grounded, or possibly get fired or arrested. And home scenes are in between missions when you're going to resolve that as a table and as a group. So, home scenes provide some very important context for your table. One is for you to insert plot events and how to string together missions that might not otherwise be connected. It's also good just to show as a baseline for when missions get crazy, they have to return back to a normal home life, sometimes for years at a time. And and home scenes are also a great way of showing this passage of time, that agents aren't just on call and doing week after week after week of missions. A year or two or three or 10 even go by in between missions, and it really shows and encapsulates how crazy the missions of Delta Green really are in someone's life, that this is not the norm or something your agent should be getting used to. In this rules reference behind me, I'll post the link of where to find it. You can find it on the Delta Green subscription website. It's a great little rules booklet. This has 2 pages just devoted to all about home scene and bond rules, and I think this is a fantastic tool just to hand to my players even before we go into a home scene session, and so they can go ahead and pick what they want to do. My favorite 2 options of all the home scene stuff is right here, staying on the case and study the unnatural. So staying on the case is going to be a great way for your agents to get plot threads resolved in between missions. So that's why you want to implement some extended plot ideas in your scenarios, so that in the home scenes your agents can stay on the case. And likewise, studying the unnatural is if they take home an artifact or have something creepy left over from mission that they want to study and research and kind of attune with in D&D terms, but something they want to study up on and really figure out. And if any of my players are going to pick this option, I ask them to tell me beforehand so that I can do some prep and get ready for it. But these 2 are without a doubt my favorite 2 things for my players to take, and it's really cool just to implement that furthering of a plot. And talking about studying the unnatural, this is why I quite like this ArcInt book, as this is cool. This is stuffed with cool artifacts for your agents to find during missions and possibly take home and study. And some of this you can even lead to link to your next scenario. You always have to be looking for plot threads to string together and stuff to make it feel like a cohesive story, especially if you're running relatively unrelated one-shots together in your campaign. I also have to shout out one of my other favorite books in the Delta Green collections. This is The Labyrinth. And what this is some factions and some NPCs and some stuff to throw into your game, but a lot of these have home scene interactions as a good way to break up your home scenes and to implement that larger story that I keep yapping on about. Great book. If you want some more connective tissue to your campaigns, you won't regret getting this and just reading it and plumbing it for great ideas. It even has ways to implement each of these factions inside regular missions as well, so cannot recommend this enough to improve your Delta Green campaigns. I also like the short scenario Code Adam from Unspeakable Oath Volume 23, which is this weird little home scene thing you can run in between, of course, for an agent that's perhaps losing it more than the rest. I think this is a neat little mission, and I'd love to see it talked about more. So can't recommend this one enough, too, if you want to pick this up and read it. Also, if a particularly long stretch of time is happening between missions, I usually think about 2 years or so. I let my agents pick two options to do just because it makes sense in that amount of time to have them do home scenes. And home scenes are fun and a cool way to level up. And a lot of times still a tough role that they're making or a tough decision that they're choosing. So I just like to give my agents two just because it expands their options and maybe gives them a little more ammunition in their actual scene itself. It's also worth reminding your agents about what home scenes are really for, and they are for showing the degradation of your agent. Unlike a lot of other role playing games, your agent doesn't really have much of a character arc as a character tumble downhill, and being a Delta Green agent isn't something that's particularly fun or good for you or really has any benefits. Like, you are here to save the world, but even the knowledge of the unnatural and what's really out there is brutal. I mean, imagine holding in your head the idea that, oh yes, the old ones can come at any time and destroy the entire world, but I still have to pay rent. I still have to go to work to pay for my child's daycare. And that's the kind of idea you're trying to implement and show with these home scenes, and make sure your agents really understand that they're showing these relationships going downhill and your agent just becoming more and more withdrawn or whatever they want for their agent, but it has to be inherently kind of negative as they go about their day-to-day lives with this extraterrestrial knowledge shoved deep in their brains, whether they like it or not. Now, like I said, the actual rules for running home scenes are all of barely 4 pages in the handler's guide. So for something that's so talked about as being essential to Delta Green, it really could use more guidance on how to actually mechanically run these and what it's going to look like at your table. And home scenes are something that me and my group really stumbled over at first before we understood exactly what the system is looking for and what we're looking for at a table. So I'm going to go over a few different ways of running home scenes, some pros and cons of each, and you can kind of pick the one that goes right for your table. I actually switch between the ways I run home scenes based on the mood and what we're looking for. Another thing to note about home scenes is that if you're going to do home scenes seriously, and you should, is that home scenes will take longer than you expect. I certainly had the assumption that, oh, these are just going to be little quick few minute things, then we'll hop straight into the full mission. But when you get into the mechanics and people get really into the stories and the role playing, and especially if you're implementing extra plot elements to shove in there, your home scene might even take 3/4 of a session, if not longer. And that's not bad, and that really increases this glue of a campaign that you're crafting together, and lean into it. I mean, there's no greater twist than having a home scene become the mission for a group. I also find that home scenes are a great litmus test to see what your players are interested in Delta Green and how to expand on that. If you introduce some stuff about like the schism and your players like aren't picking at it or don't want to do any research about during the home scenes, then you know, hey, let's try a new thing to investigate. For me, it was kind of like that until I introduced Club Apocalypse, and they were very interested in that. I wanted to follow up in Club Apocalypse in home scenes and stuff like that, so I knew I wanted to implement some Club Apocalypse stuff. And that's just something to keep in mind as a handler. It's a great way to test and see what parts of the conspiracy your agents want to see. And this is where you should encourage your players to also investigate into the gods or stuff they like as well. If your players aren't big Lovecraft junkies, they might not know much about Yog-Sothoth or Azathoth or Nyarlathotep or whatever. And this is your place to encourage them to research that in their downtime, and you should be prepared to even cut stuff from the handler's guide or wherever into cool documents to give off to your players as they study and know more about the Lovecraft universe. This is also a good place to figure out what you want to put into your green box in the following mission to encourage these plot lines that you're building. You also can use home scenes to see what bonds your agents prioritize and what aspects of their character they want to focus on, and then you can abuse that during missions. Like, for example, if an agent's home scenes are all about his wife, then during missions, if he hasn't been home for a few days, you already have an NPC to play act as and have an existing relationship to pull up and phone call and chew him out for not being home. And so it's just something to keep note of when your agents are performing these home scenes about who they like the most, so you can make sure to turn it around and use it against them. So my default method is to run it in a player driven third or first person description talking about their lives. You can find a lot of similar descriptions of an agent's life in between the pages of the agent's handbook, which is a lot of microfiction. And you can find a lot of this microfiction in the Way It Went Down volumes, which are good to read just to get an idea about how a home scene kind of looks as an agent walks in sad and depressed and has to deal with their knowledge that there's so much more horrible things out there and they're just doing this to protect their kids. And what I usually like to do is we go through all the mechanical rolling. All my agents pick their home scene pursuits, they roll all their dice, they take all their costs, they realize all the mechanical stuff, get that all knocked out of the way, and then they just have the open floor for a few minutes to describe a story about their lives. It can either be a little vignette looking into one of their lives, it can be kind of a larger overview of their lives, but you want to give your agents the floor to talk about how working in Delta Green and seeing these horrible things and reducing their bonds affects their relationships. Kind of just a glance into this person's life. Now, for pros of this is that if you have a really narratively focused play group and players that are really interested in showing their agent's downfall, you can get some great harrowing stories that you can even think about. And I love having that player freedom and letting your players decide how exactly they want to go about implementing this and showing their lives. I think there's a great deal of personalization here and a great deal of role play that is entirely with one person on a spotlight. But as a con, if you're looking to implement more GM heavy story driven stuff, you kind of have to implement that separate from their home scene. Also, if you have a player that's, I don't want to use the word less creative, but someone who's less invested possibly in that role play or their story about their lives, it's kind of easy for them to just hand away, be like, oh yeah, I did this, I did that, and moving on, which is a little disappointing for a table. But usually if you have other people that are so heavily invested and give this great example, kind of like this story in the background you can find in the home scene section, it can really show how home scenes really open up at your character and really can lead to tragedy as their lives get worse and worse and worse. Now, one of my other favorite methods of running home scenes is a little more involved. What you're going to do is you're going to have your agent, the person who's doing the home scene, assign other players as actors in their lives, be it their mom, daughter, husband, wife, whatever. And they're going to kind of give them a general overview of the scene that's happening. And then they're kind of going to free-form role play per the agent's direction on their lives, how they want to go. And this is really neat, and I use this for really intensive home scenes when we're trying to show a lot of time passing or have possibly the capstone before we send off on our final mission. But this is cool because it gets all your players involved in everyone's home scene, and it can really increase the stakes and really show the impact even more than you can imagine, as players can think of some crazy things to do to each other. And of course, you want your players to make sure they're doing this within the rights of the player whose home scene it is. I mean, don't just be divorcing someone for the lulz, but it can lead to some really emotionally surprising role playing. One possible con of, though, is it is a little awkward acting with your friends sitting around a table as their husband or wife. So it's really going to need a party that's okay with it, and possibly one that's a little more familiar with each other to pull this off successfully. But if you can, this is a really cool way of implementing a home scene, but this will take longer than usual and be quite involved. And then, of course, there's the classic method you do when you're running missions, which is where you, as the game master, describes the problems, describes situations to your agent, and that can also happen during home scenes, and it's a good way of catching your agents off guard when they're expecting to narrate something themselves, and instead they hear a knocking at the door, and it leads them down this rabbit hole. So that's just something to keep in mind, and I swap between all three of these mentioned methods based on what I'm looking to do for the lead into the next scenario, or what I'm looking to do in between scenarios. But that's going to wrap us up on home scenes. If you have some cool things you've done during home scenes or other ways you've implemented it, I would love to hear about it. Home scenes are one thing that, again, despite being talked about, I feel like a lot in the Delta Green community, I very rarely see tons of descriptors on how to run it or what to do. So I hope my video helps you out and improves your home scenes and helps increase that connective glue. I'd love to hear about your home scenes and what you do and some successes and what you've learned from running them. But thanks everybody. I'll see you next time.